welcome to IronIO Fireside Chats. I'm Dave Nugent, developer advocate at IronIO, and I'm here with our head of business development, Ivan Dwyer. We're going to talk about a hot topic in the industry right now, serverless. Now, Ivan's been talking a lot about this, and I was just hoping that you could explain serverless. Is it just a buzzword? Is there meat behind that?
Sure. Well, you're correct. It's definitely a buzzword, but like so many industry trends that reach the hype cycle, there is some true meaning there. It just kind of requires us to cut through the noise a bit to uncover what that really is, which is what I hope we can accomplish today. Before we get into that, I do want to make two clarifying points on the literal side of the serverless movement. Number one, serverless computing is impossible. We're still dealing with servers to do the processing. And number two, a serverless architecture is also impossible. The makeup of any system is, of course, going to include servers. So with that out of the way, what we're really talking about when we say serverless is providing a serverless experience to developers so they can kind of really keep their focus on building and deploying applications without having to worry about operations at scale. And we're able to do that by abstracting away much of the operations required to run certain workloads behind the scenes through this kind of automated pipeline that we've kind of called serverless. So we're not getting rid of the servers through some form of black magic. We're really just removing the process of dealing with them from the development lifecycle.
Right, because I've heard people say, oh, servers, there still are servers, they're just going to be managed by somebody else.
Sure, and I think I see that as a knee-jerk reaction to the term serverless, which is totally fair, but I think it's too simplistic of a view. If we're really going to treat serverless as its own trend, we kind of have to look past beyond just the notion of server management. So the way I really see serverless is the convergence of a few parallel technological evolutions that have now been up-leveled kind of at the organizational level to provide real value to the business, and that value being developer empowerment, which is crucial to any business in today's really fast-paced world.
Yeah, totally crucial. But I mean, how is that different than platform as a service, where you still don't need to worry about building and scaling your infrastructure to scale your app?
Sure. Well, serverless is definitely heavily rooted in PaaS, and we carry along many of the associated concepts around abstraction and productivity. I remember the first time I ran Heroku Push and just kind of watched the magic happen behind the scenes. It was pretty crazy. I take it for granted now, but it's certainly a far cry from where I started, which was FTP overriding Perl CGI scripts to a web server sitting in my dorm room right next to my turntables. So we've definitely come a long way. But the distinction I like to make with serverless is really in the nature of the workloads themselves. So when we push an application to the cloud, we're still doing that with some notion of physicality in mind, because we have these, a known IP address and an open port that's accepting the incoming requests. So no matter how much operational abstraction we put forth, there's still a notion of servers, some servers running that live application. So if we examine these workloads that are kind of in the serverless pattern, we can see the distinction. There's these kind of independent, stateless jobs that have a discrete start and finish. So we're not necessarily pushing them to a live runtime in the same way we are with these app-centric workloads. What we do is we package them up and then upload them. And then they're sitting there in this kind of ready-to-execute state. And then when some event occurs, which could be like a system event, an application event, or a real-world event, that triggers this automated workflow that provisions those resources, executes that code process, and then destroys those resources, all without any manual intervention. So that's how we're able to kind of get away with calling it serverless compared to platform as a service.
So this is where people might say, oh great, that's no ops. Now can you clarify, is that tied to the serverless architecture?
Absolutely not, actually. I think that's a gross misinterpretation of the term serverless. In fact, it's more the opposite, because we're dealing with such extreme levels of automation behind the scenes. It's even more important to put forth the proper configuration. The difference really with serverless is we're kind of shifting that configuration from the systems layer, where we might write a Terraform script to provision a VPC in AWS, to the application layer, where we're just hitting an API. So really, we're taking that DevOps mantra, infrastructure as code, and in this context, it's more along the lines of infrastructure in response to code. But it's definitely not no ops.
So, like, as a developer or as a manager of a team of developers, how does this change my day-to-day workflow?
Right, good question. I mean, after all, that's really what it's all about. And I think what's great about the serverless patterns is that it doesn't really matter how far along you are in your kind of cloud native journey or along with microservices. We're dealing with individual jobs, so you can pick one and kind of start from there. And really the way to get started is to kind of examine your whole application and kind of identify the right candidates that would fit this model well. Some of those examples might be a back-end transaction that you want to remove from the user experience, like processing a credit card or sending an email. ETL like data pipelines, where you're continually capturing data from a source and then doing some analysis on it. So that could be like sensors that are on a factory floor. We see a lot of like large file processing, so encoding a video or formatting an image. Just like batch processes, like crawling the web to kind of extract data. And then cron jobs, like sending a daily email or daily notification. A cron schedule is just an event in this kind of event computing world. So what all of those have in common is that they're independent, finite jobs that run in the background when some predetermined event occurs. So in the cloud native application world, those fall outside of the 12-factor app model, which is really why we're kind of looking at these in a different way.
Okay, so we've talked about specific tasks. Let's take a step back, talk about the whole ecosystem. Who's doing what? Where does Iron fit into this?
Sure. So a lot of these concepts have existed for some time, but really we started talking about serverless with the introduction of AWS Lambda in, I think it was late 2014. Since then, Google and Microsoft have introduced their own versions, still in beta, but definitely following suit. And it's such a compute-centric pattern, it's pretty natural that the IaaS providers would want to offer that kind of service. And the end users certainly win because with these types of services, you're only paying for the compute time for the actual processing itself. So it's a really nice pairing. And then another key benefit of these IaaS native services is this ability to kind of unlock the internal infrastructure and the internal systems. So you can capture events that are happening, and then those can trigger some of these workflows. And that's pretty cool if you really, first kind of glance, but if you take a step back and you think about it, that could also be seen as a deterrent. It's kind of one thing to be locked into a vendor at the service level. We're pretty used to that by now, but it's an entirely separate matter to be locked in at the technology level. And once you start coupling your business logic to your systems, you're pretty stuck in that environment. So, unless you're like 100% confident that you're going to run 100% of your application workloads on the same cloud provider for the foreseeable future, it's kind of worth giving a second look at how you go down this serverless path. And that's really where we see kind of IronIO fit in the picture. First we standardize our own containers, so this enables workload portability and just a friendlier overall developer experience. Second, we can operate anywhere, public or private. So if you want to run some workloads on-prem, some on AWS, some on Azure, you use the same API and the same service with us, and then we just distribute the workloads accordingly. And similarly, if you want to unlock some of those internal system events without actually being locked into the vendor, that's fine. You can just hook those system components up to a queue service, and then we can pull from there. Did I mention that we operate a message queue service, a high-performance message queue service under the hood? Well, we do. I'll save that pitch for another time, but at the end of the day, what we're finding is that businesses want this serverless functionality, but they want it with the flexibility and control that they can operate it on their own terms. And that's IronIO.
And so businesses want IronIO, businesses are interested in this architecture, but I'm sure they're curious, is it ready for production?
Right, I mean, with this much automation, what could possibly go wrong? As with anything, I'd say getting to production grade comes down to confidence. And I'll use another technological advancement as an analogy, that's driverless cars. I mean, the actual capabilities to do that are just a piece of the puzzle. Things get really interesting and the real work happens when you have to start thinking about every possible scenario once you deploy those cars into the real world. Because no one in their right mind is just going to get into a driverless car until they're confident it's safe. And actually yesterday I came across an article that Google is paying people $20 an hour to test drive their driverless cars, which is essentially sitting there waiting to grab the wheel in case something goes wrong. So, no thanks on that. So the capabilities to run a function in the cloud, there's nothing groundbreaking there. But because there's so much automation happening behind the scenes, where things get really interesting and get up to the production grade, are kind of looking at what are the possible scenarios now that I've enabled this much automation. And again, that's a key part that I think IronIO stands out, is because we've been operating our platform in production on behalf of our customers for 5 years now. And we've seen a wide range of use cases, and we've also seen firsthand, the different types of things that can go wrong in a system like that. But through those experiences and through working with our customers, we've been able to adjust and just continue to harden the platform that we offer to where we are today, which is an enterprise-grade job processing platform. And in fact, as of this week, IronIO was named a Gartner Pool vendor in the PaaS category. So there you have it.
Well, I think we're just about out of time.
Great.
But I wanted to thank everybody for attending our first IronIO Fireside Chat. And I wanted to mention that if they're interested in learning more, Ivan actually has a white paper called Developer Empowerment Reaches New Heights that goes into a lot of this in depth. Ivan, thank you very much for chatting with us.
Thanks, Dave. This is awesome. Cheers.